Someone asks, can you explain what an INFJ loop is and how to get out of it? It really starts with understanding your comfort zone as an introverted intuitive. And I'm an INFJ as well, so I'll refer to myself and say things like we, but this would also apply to INTJs. For an introverted intuitive, according to Carl Jung, our comfort zone is really in detaching from the external, outside, objective, measurable world and looking at our own internal, subjective awareness where we're most comfortable and most adept at simply being aware, at seeing underlying connections between different things and seeing how all those different connections connect in a cumulative, singular way, as opposed to extroverted intuitives that also want to see how everything connects, but they're not putting it all together into one clear picture subjectively. They're looking outward and getting excited about possibilities. That's not what the INFJ or INTJ does, or at least that's not where we're most comfortable, where we're most adept, what we're the most used to doing. For us, it's more of a quiet, internal, prolonged dreamscape that we experience asleep and awake, and that makes sense of everything. That's our comfort zone. And so the way that Jung laid out his typology, for whatever you're most adept at, whatever you're most comfortable at, there's also something that's the opposite of that that's lacking. And so for us as introverted intuitives, what's lacking is our connection to the experiential world around us. We take in everything from the world around us, but to come to life in that world, to show up in that world as a being, a person, a thing that takes charge and works pieces together to its own advantage, that's probably about as far from our comfort zone and our natural way of being as you could get. And there are times where we feel we have to do it, whether we're on a sports team or engaging in some activity or in a meeting at work, and we know that we have to step up and say something to make something happen. And really, the way it works is whatever you're most comfortable and adept at, that in and of itself is incomplete until it becomes something or completes its arc into its opposite. And what that means for an INFJ is, yes, we love to step away and look within and see that cumulative vision of meaning and possibility and what it could all mean. But that in and of itself, and we know this as INFJs, is incomplete. We don't want to just see. We want to see for the purpose of bringing what we see to the outside experiential world. And so that's what our life is about, really, as INFJs, completing that loop in some way. I shouldn't have used the word loop because I'm not talking about the INFJ loop that this question refers to. I'm talking about the loop between what's called the dominant and the inferior function, the place where we're most at home and best suited for, has to work its way into the place where we're least adept and least at home and least comfortable. The way that Myers-Briggs proposes that we do that we complete our journey, is through what's called the auxiliary function. The auxiliary function exists in the same world as our inferior function, as the thing that we're the least good at. But the auxiliary function comes at that world in a way that makes sense to us, is meaningful to us, and that we can begin to pursue with great effort. Because again, it's going into a place where we're very uncomfortable, the external sensory world. But for us as INFJs, the path to that is through what's called auxiliary extroverted feeling, meaning our path into the external sensory world is not a direct line. We don't want to just step into that world and try to be like an extroverted sensor, because it's not something we can sustain, and it's something that for every type, anyone watching and you yourself realize it's doomed. You're not good at that. It's noticeable, it's cringy. It's the last thing you should do. But we do have a road in as INFJs to that extroverted external sensory world, and that's through our feeling function, which is essentially looking at everyone with our intuition and seeing not how people necessarily feel emotionally, but seeing the values of everybody and seeing with our intuition, with that part of ourself that's most innate, where we're strongest and most comfortable, using that to see what other people want and what's keeping them from what they want. And we can do that in an individual, case-by-case basis with another person, say if the INFJ is a therapist, or we can do it in a larger way with society at large. Say our intuition shows us something that society is lacking in terms of how it can get the things that it finds most worthwhile. And we are driven then to bring that. And that's our path, using our feeling function to go into that world where we're uncomfortable. And I said all that to say, this is where we come to the loop that you're asking about, the INFJ loop. The INFJ loop is essentially, instead of stepping out and using auxiliary extroverted feeling to look into the values of others with our intuition and connect in that way, because it's difficult, we revert to what's called our third function, the opposite of extroverted feeling, which is actually a lot more comfortable for us, called introverted thinking. And what that looks like is, what the loop looks like for an INFJ is using our intuition to see how things are, but instead of directing it to actually connect with others, which is difficult for us, is just holding on to those intuitions, holding on to everything that we see internally and analyzing it absolutely to death, which is what introverted thinking does. Picking apart every piece critically, thinking endlessly about every single detail of what we see, instead of stepping out and connecting with others. The reason the functions are in a line, 1, 2, 3, 4, dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior, is because it shows the particular path that you as an individual follow for growth, for your dominant function to come into the world where it's lacking, to complete its journey. If you leave out number 2, that's when looping occurs. And it's a lot more comfortable, but it's a place where if you don't change, you'll stay there forever and you'll never be satisfied. And all you'll do as an introverted intuitive is pick apart your intuitions forever. As an example, I like to write. And for a long time, I was caught in an INFJ loop, which, with my writing, which looked like this. I would write down all the things that occurred to me through my introverted intuition. And these things would occur to me at odd times when I was paying attention to something else. When I was dreaming, I'd wake up and I'd have to write it down. And I'd say most INFJs understand what that dynamic is like, because when intuition is at work and you start to recognize it, you know that this to you is something valuable. And so I would capture all those. But instead of reaching out and finding people that I could connect my intuitions with, and I guess use as an audience, so to speak, for the writing, or at least direct my intuition toward, I secluded myself and spent years and years just going over every detail of every little thing I'd written, categorizing all of it, putting it all together in a line, making it sound as perfect as I possibly could. And looking back now, I didn't realize at the time how anxious a process that actually was for me. It was something that caused me to lose sleep and just not be fun to be around at all for my friends and family, especially because I took it all so seriously, that I was this seer who was seeing all these important things, and I had to get them aligned just right, and I had to make sense of each one, and I'd study and do all this research. And it wasn't until much later, when I was essentially forced through a scenario that I won't get into now, to leave my comfort zone and connect with other people, that I saw, that I could see how I was hindering and damaging and holding myself back from my own potential, while at the same time thinking I was doing something worthwhile, because I was endlessly thinking about the things that I saw through my intuition. Now, the process is very different. And when you see how the dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, to inferior, line up, and you see the place of each, it makes sense. Essentially, how an INFJ should work if they want to maximize their potential, if they want to make something of their intuitions, which they identify with, is to step out into the world and connect with others, and even though it's uncomfortable, find whatever way makes sense to you to connect with other people. Then, after you connect, or as you connect, that's when tertiary introverted thinking comes in to look at each piece and align it just right and shave off what's unnecessary. But we as INFJs are not really that adept at introverted thinking, not the way an introverted thinker is, or even someone with auxiliary introverted thinking could be. It's not supposed to be the thing that we spend all our time doing. It's really best utilized as an afterthought, as something that comes in once we're already doing the thing that is difficult but expresses our intuition in a way that connects with others, something that comes in at that point to tighten things up and kind of look at the pieces and cut out what's extra, what's excess. Stephen King, who's an INFJ, talks about that in his book on writing, where he says in rewriting, there's a draft where he looks at everything he says and essentially cuts out, I think he said it's either 10 or 15%. And to me, that's a great example of introverted thinking. He doesn't come into his story analyzing every little piece of the idea and plotting out exactly how it has to look before he writes the story. No, he writes the story, he connects via his characters as he does so, having the experience, and then introverted thinking comes in. And if you follow that 4-step process with all those pieces in their right place, that's how you eventually indirectly approach the external sensory world, where what you see and how you connect it with people and how you better align and kind of cut off excess and tighten up all of that with thinking really can be something that others experience and enjoy, and that makes the difference that you, as an INFJ, hope to make with your life.